It's Spain. It's Germany. It's Japan. And it's Costa Rica. It's Group E. And it's the 2022 FIFA World Cup in Qatar. It's the International Soccer Preview by Soccerphiles Canada. So part 3, we're going to begin by giving a reminder of their history, a summary of their history, and then their recent form for each team, and then that'll lead us into more and more analysis about their prospects for the Cup. So let's begin with Spain, a summary of Spain. The dynasty, along with the tiki-taka style of passing the ball around in the midfield, which I must say drove my mother crazy, was a very impressive period, but it came crashing down in the 2014 World Cup with a shocking 1-5 loss to Netherlands in their opener and an exit at the group stage. Perhaps it had been foreshadowed by a humiliating 0-3 loss to Brazil in the final of the 2013 Confederations Cup. The worry was that it would turn out to be a flash in the pan, as their fourth place finish was in the 1950 World Cup, and their 1964 Euro Cup title was in 1964, and their second place Euro Cup finish had been too. All of those successes followed by non-qualifications, or at best by a group stage exit. Or perhaps they would return to the ambivalent history of the past, where the quarterfinals seemed their ceiling, or the deeper past of the pre-1980, where even reaching the World Cup was a challenge for Spain.
Yeah, the direction had proved to be a slow recovery. Still a strong team, even though round of 16 finishes in Euro 2016 and the World Cup 2018 were a bit disappointing. The semi-final finish in Euro 2020 matched their talent more suitably, and they go into the 2022 World Cup with renewed hope, looking strong in qualifying and in Euro Nations League games, although not without the odd shudder.
That's right. Okay, let's take a look at Germany. Germany is the most consistent team in world soccer. Brazil, the only comparable team. They were not part of the World Cups in 1930 and 1950, but have reached the World Cup every time they have entered. The only time they failed at the group stage was in 1938 and recently in 2018. They've reached the final 8 times and won half of them with this. Doing this 3 times in a row from 1982 to 1990, and 3 out of 4 times between 2002 and 2014. Euro Cup is similar but slightly less consistent, with 1 failure to qualify and 3 group stage knockouts. They have reached the final 6 times, again winning half of them. However, only one of these has been in this millennium, a second place finish in 2008. They have still passed the last 4 group stages and reached the semi-finals twice in 2012 and 2016. So they remain a consistent contender near the top.
From that summary, we can see why failing to pass the group stage in 2018 was such a shock. Current form comes down to how well they recovered from that shock. Their history suggests it was an errant result, not likely to happen again. But it is possible it will be a lull like the 2 World Cup quarterfinal finishes in a row from 1994 to 98, or 2 group stage finishes in a row in the Euro Cup from 2000 and 2004. Even there, they cannot really be considered lulls since they won the opposite cup in the middle of each of those. But the round of 16 finish in the 2020 Euro Cup makes it as close as they've ever been, or as they've been to a lull across both cups. 1 or 2 more competitions are needed to draw a conclusion on that, but we can follow his progress through the 2022-23 Nations League. There they sit after 4 games in second behind Hungary, but ahead of Italy and England. They have 1 win and 3 draws, so perhaps they're not back to the dominant form they would hope for.
All right, well, moving on to Japan. Japan, after being a non-entity for most of the last century, stormed onto the Asian Cup stage in 1992 and the World Cup stage in 2002. They have since proven the strongest team in Asia, at least in terms of Asian Cup play. South Korea still dominates the local level, and it's an interesting debate as to who, between the two great rivals, has impressed most on the world stage, though there are other candidates in the region in that argument. However, Japan and all strong teams are being challenged by smaller, improving teams, most visibly Qatar, who won the 2019 Asian Cup. The first time since 1992 where Japan went 2 cups in a row without a title. More subtly, though, they and other strong teams are dropping a few more points in their campaigns to lesser teams, whether that means those teams are improving or they are becoming less consistent. On the whole, though, the region is becoming more competitive on the world stage.
Yeah, reaching beyond the group stage of the 2002 World Cup was put down to the advantage of hosting. So doing so again in 2010 showed improvement, and that South Korea also did so, showed improvement for the region, as you mentioned. A third time in 2018 legitimizes them as a respectable force at the group stage level, and the general competitiveness of Asian teams in 2018, South Korea once again stealing Japan's thunder by knocking out Germany, argues that the region is catching up to the strength of other regions. As you said, weaker teams are earning more points against Japan, and the big team is less a sign of inconsistency, and more a sign that the lesser teams are improving, and Qatar leading the way there. But Japan lead the way as far as Asian strength is viewed on the world stage. It jumped forward when the World Cup was in Asia in 2020 or in 2002, and it will be interesting to see the west side of the region as hosts in 2022.
All right, and finally, a summary and form of Costa Rica. So I'll do the summary and Connor does the form. Costa Rica are currently the strongest team in Central America, though that was not always the case. Honduras and El Salvador have had their turns at the World Cup, and Panama has recently become a force in the region. The wider region includes Mexico, USA, Canada, and the Caribbean teams, amongst whom Cuba, Haiti, Jamaica, and Trinidad and Tobago sometimes challenge. Costa Rica was a strong force in the region, winning 3 CONCACAF championships from 1963 to 1989, but did not reach the World Cup during that time, with a lull in both competitions in the 70s and early 80s. Mexico and USA usually take 2 of the 4 World Cup spots available, and from 1990, especially from 2002, they have usually taken 1 of the 2 remaining for the rest of the region. That puts them as the 3rd or 4th strongest team in the region, but that hasn't played out in the regional cups, where they reached the semi-finals, effectively the top 4, only twice since 2005, though they do consistently finish in the top 8.
Costa Rica continued to rely on the successful World Cup 2014 squad, but the 2019 and 2021 Gold Cup suggested they are aging out and not being replaced. In 2002 World Cup qualifying, it looked as if Panama would take their World Cup spot, but a strong finish saw Costa Rica seize it back. A bit of renewal occurred, but it was really a spurt of form from the veterans. Clearly, more renewal will be necessary going forward, but they have consistently produced teams strong enough to reach the World Cup over the past 20 years. So they may come through the imminent retirement of that 2014 squad.
All right. Well, we'll talk about that a bit more later, but we're going to move on to the rankings of each team. Go ahead, Connor.
So we'll begin with Spain, the Pot 1 team. So Spain ranked 6th in the FIFA rankings and 3rd in ELO. They actually typically track a little bit higher in their ELO ranking, which tends to take a bit more of a longer historical perspective.
Yeah, that's right. And of course, they were first for a long time in that period from 2008 to 2012. The lowest they've been in FIFA is 11th. But as you say, in ELO rankings, they've never gone below 10.
Yeah, amazing. Germany are currently 11th in FIFA rankings and 8th in ELO. They've actually been outside the top 10 since December 2018, which was a fall from first place. And Germany were actually first or second for a long time, kind of from December 2012 onwards. So I guess based on the rankings, you would say that kind of reflects a bit of the lull that we've talked about.
Yeah, they've got to be quite annoyed that they're a second pot team here, and I think they'll be working hard to do something about that. As you say, they've been first or second, or at least in the top five for most of their career. Interestingly, before the World Cup in 2006, which they hosted, they had to do a big rebuilding phase. They were very nervous about that cup, and they were as low as 21st in the FIFA rankings before that tournament. Though in ELO rankings, they've really never been below 15th.
All right, moving on to Japan, the pot three team. They're currently 24th in the world according to FIFA and 31st according to ELO.
Right. Well, that 24th in FIFA, I think is a little bit high for Japan. What do you think, Connor?
Yeah, it reflects, probably they're reaching the final of the most recent Asian Cup. But as we said, they didn't actually perform particularly well there, despite going all the way to the final.
Yeah, it's arguable, but I think 31st in ELO is probably more representative. And they've been kind of up and down over the years, as low as 41st in ELO rankings in June 2018. And in 2011, they were in the top 15. So bouncing around quite a bit there.
Yeah, and then finally Costa Rica, they're the pot four team. They're 34th in FIFA and 37th in ELO, so below Japan in both ranking systems. They've actually risen recently, probably because of their very good form at the end of qualifying. But as recently as December 2021, they were 49th in FIFA and 58th in ELO.
Right, so they've jumped 20 points in 20 points in ELO, but whether that really represents improvement is something we'll discuss a bit later. They were, of course, high after the 2014 World Cup. They reached about 15th in both ELO and ELO, but typically they're more around 40th in the world. All right, well, that brings us to the end of the rankings. Let's take a look at the head-to-heads. And Connor will give an overview, and then I'll talk about a couple of details as he goes.
Yeah, first with Spain, the pot one team, they've actually never met Japan or Costa Rica in competitive matches, but they do have a long history with Germany, and Germany comes out ahead with 4 wins, 2 draws, and 3 losses.
Right, and Germany won most of those games in the early period where Spain wasn't that strong. But interestingly, they did meet in 2008 and 2010 when Spain was strong during their dynasty period. That's their 2 most recent meetings, and Spain won them both, though arguably they're not as strong now.
Right. Germany haven't met Japan previously. They met South Korea a number of times, as we mentioned. But Germany have met Costa Rica. That was the opening game in the 2006 World Cup. We talked about that one as well. That's their only meeting. So Germany has a one win from 1 game played. And then finally, Japan and Costa Rica have never met.
Right. Yeah, that Germany-Costa Rica game was a really good game. And Costa Rica was a bit competitive there. So hopefully they can pull off something like that this time. Let's take a look at the odds. At the beginning, Connor mentioned kind of where they are in the pots, and most of the teams kind of come from the middle of their pots. In fact, we could argue that Germany and Spain are both pot 1 teams, and Japan and Costa Rica are both pot 3 teams. So that's kind of interesting, hey?
Yeah. And the odds really reflect that. We just talked about the odds to qualify from the group. Spain are given a 90.5% chance and Germany 87% chance. Japan are a bit outsiders with just 22.5% chance. And then Costa Rica, the real outsider, is just 9.8. Though it would be interesting to look back at what their odds were, of course, in 2014 when they overturned that group. So, I mean, predictably, Costa Rica have the lowest odds to advance. But I guess looking, not too far recent past, you can take that with a grain of salt.
Yeah, that's funny. They probably had lower odds there than they have here. Okay, well, that kind of leads us into a discussion, and maybe we can begin that discussion with whether you agree with those odds. Do you think Spain is slightly favorite to Germany?
Yeah, I would probably say so now, that Spain is slightly favored. But I guess I want to ask you before we just kind of directly compare Spain and Germany. Do you see Japan or Costa Rica getting out of this group or threatening to do so?
That's a tough question. I mean, definitely there seem to be Spain and Germany in their own little league at the top, and Japan and Costa Rica battling it out for second and third place. However, I think we've seen enough lapses with Spain and Germany that it is possible that they could be surprised by Japan and Costa Rica. I don't see a high chance of it here, but I kind of think it's possible. How about you?
Yeah, I think it's interesting in that both Spain and Germany have group stage exits, in the last two cups.
Yeah.
And, they were expected to get through. I don't really see it here. Ironically, I see Germany is probably the more inconsistent team. We talked about their qualifying loss at home to North Macedonia, which is ironic because Germany is perhaps the most consistent team over the long history, but they've been inconsistent recently. So, Germany fans were hoping history doesn't repeat itself. I mean, I have to say Spain and Germany, that's where I put my money to advance.
Yeah, well, my motto, as I was writing this thing, I kind of came up with a motto with Germany in that they lapse but don't lull. And if they do kind of don't do well here, I think it would amount to a lull. But I think Germany is going to be really determined to come out of the couple of lapses that they've had. So I agree with you. They are seeming a bit more inconsistent than Spain right now. But I kind of think that Germany is going to bounce back. They have the stronger history, and as I said, they always seem to come back whenever they do go through some trouble. So actually, I'm pipping Germany over Spain for this.
Yeah, I think Spain kind of coming down from their dynasty. They certainly haven't been written off. People view them as a strong team, but not as the invincibles that they once were. And perhaps that gives Spain a bit of an advantage. Perhaps there was a lot of pressure, especially as some of those dynasty members, Xavi, Iniesta, Puyol, as they retired. Perhaps there was a weight of expectation on a new generation. So I do think Spain are kind of finding their feet again, and I expect them to have a strong tournament here.
Yeah, one of the things I'm really interested in here is whether Japan can trouble them. We've seen that Spain and Germany have both been troubled by South Korea. Spain had a bit of trouble with Iran and Morocco. That's an African team, but I think we can throw them into this discussion. And generally, that region is becoming stronger. So I do give Japan a bit of a chance here. I was surprised that in the odds that Japan was given a 23% chance of passing the group stage, while Costa Rica was just given a 10% chance. I really thought the odds makers would view those as quite even.
Yeah, personally, I think Japan are the stronger team. They've shown it more consistently in their World Cup history, getting through beyond the group stage about half the time.
Yeah, 3 out of the last 5 times.
Yeah, it's impressive. And I think Japan has stronger players and players playing in bigger leagues. So, I think Japan are a good team. I think Japan is certainly capable of taking points off, one or potentially both of Spain or Germany. I don't see it being enough to go through, but they could have a strong influence on who finishes first in the group. And
Definitely.
potentially, if a second place team ends up with a very difficult group or difficult matchup in the round of 16, Japan could have a very significant say on either Spain or Germany's tournaments and their tournament chances just by, even managing to draw a game. So, and I definitely think it's possible. I'm convinced that Japan are good enough to do that.
Yeah, I really think Spain and Germany will have to be at their best. Germany will definitely have to overcome their recent inconsistency. Otherwise, they could well be taken by surprise by Japan or even by Costa Rica. But I want to just talk a little bit about Costa Rica because, while the qualification was going on, actually the 2019 and 2021 Cup, I was like, what are they doing? Like, they're going with those veterans from 2014, which were great players. Some of them still are, but like they didn't seem to be doing anything to renew themselves. And all through the 2019-21 Gold Cups, they just looked so flat. And then through the World Cup qualification for the first half, they looked so flat. I don't know how they pulled it off. I know they had a little bit of renewal, but it really was kind of the, Joel Campbell got the goal in the final playoff game. It was the veterans that pulled them through. But honestly, I cannot see the veterans pulling them through this World Cup stage. Do you have anything to say?
Yeah, I mean, Brian Ruiz, who was playing in the Premier League like about a decade ago, it seems, he's still around and they rely on him to score goals despite
they do.
I think he's pushing 40 now. And like you said, very surprised that they didn't use 2 Gold Cups. They had 2 Gold Cups since the last World Cup to bring in young players and experiment. And I was really surprised they didn't. They were quite flat. So I see kind of Costa Rica's golden age, at least on the World Cup stage, kind of, peaking really with that 2014 surprise. Perhaps to me, the biggest surprise in qualification was that they managed to turn things around.
Yeah.
Because having watched them play in Canada and highlights of their other games, they were actually quite poor, and I didn't quite see them being capable of turning it around, but they went on that kind of magical run. I think they're probably happy to be here. I mean, traditionally, they've been the 3rd strongest team behind USA and Mexico, but a very strong Canada, who won qualification, is changing that. So I think their kind of traditional spot is kind of 3rd, among the top 3 teams in the region. I think long-term that's under threat. We may see less consistent qualification from them in the future. So yeah, I see them here as they're not coming in kind of at a peak in their history. I think they're happy to be here, and I think they're kind of unlucky. They got put in a very strong group.
Mm-hmm.
And I really see them perhaps being competitive with Japan, but I don't see them really taking points off the European team.
Yeah, I don't really agree with you on that one, Connor, because I really don't see any group that they would be in that they would really have a chance of second place. I mean, the African region too, like Asia, is growing a bit stronger. I'm really hoping that Africa will come to a bit of fruition in this cup. They were hoping that would happen in 2010. I'm getting a bit off topic though. I can't see any team, any teams that they would be favored over in this cup.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point. I mean, it is a very difficult to try and overcome a top 2 of Spain and Germany, but you're right. Looking at the list of pot 2 teams, with the exception of the United States, perhaps, who they seem to get the better of, don't really see them advancing. They are, I think their ranking at the time of the draw 31st in FIFA. I think that was a little bit inflated. I think they're one of the smaller teams, one of the weaker teams, and I think that truth will come out in this tournament.
Yeah, I just don't think they have the squad to pull a surprise like they did in 2014. I think Japan have that capability and the players to take advantage of any cracks that Spain and Germany have in their, probably in their confidence more than in their actual squad. But
Yeah.
not Costa Rica. But anyway, I've just seen you dodging and refusing to commit this whole time. But I'm gonna pin you down here. What is going to happen in this group?
I'm gonna go with the pots. I say Spain in first place, Germany second, Japan in third, and Costa Rica fourth.
All right. Well, I'm gonna kind of slightly alter it and call Germany in first. That's because I think they will respond to inconsistency, and but I think it'll be close between them and Spain. I really hope that Japan does surprise, but I wouldn't predict it. So I got to put Japan in third and Costa Rica in fourth. All right. Well, that brings us to the end of the podcast, and thanks for listening.
Yeah, those who aren't familiar with our podcast might want to keep listening for some information for further listening. But if you're turning off now, goodbye, and we'll hope you tune into our next podcast in the series.
All right, yeah, stay tuned for more information. But if you're turning off now, bye, and hope to see you in the next podcast.
Bye.
Okay, further listening. We've done 9 different series of podcasts if you're interested in a deeper dive. Some of the information may be dated, but some of the histories focus on different aspects of the team histories, so it can help you to get to know teams more intimately.
Yes, as mentioned, this is our 10th series, and we have done at least one series on every region except Oceania. We have files for that region too, and we'll do one down the road so as not to leave them out. But let's go region by region.
Right, so Europe, our first series was a group-by-group podcast on the teams of Euro 2020. That was played in the summer of 2021. And for South America, we also did a group-by-group podcast on the teams in Copa America 2021.
For North America, we have done 3 series on CONCACAF. The first was a group-by-group podcast on the teams in the 2021 Gold Cup. That included a look at Qatar. The second was a preview of the 8 teams in the final round of World Cup CONCACAF qualifying. That came with our first player series, where we went team by team through the players. The third was an update halfway through that qualification.
Yes, and for Asia, we did a group-by-group podcast on the 12 teams in the final round of World Cup qualifying, and that included a deep dive into each team's World Cup qualifying history.
We have done 3 series on African teams. The first was a group-by-group podcast on the 24 teams in the 2021 African Cup, played in early 2022. The second, done around the same time, was a team-by-team series on the players for each of those teams. Third and finally, we have recently concluded a series on almost all teams in Africa, a group-by-group examination of the 12 qualifying groups for the 2023 African Cup. This included a deep dive into their African Cup history, which was quite extensive. This provides a look into some of the lesser teams that rarely even qualify for the African Cup.
Right, and we realize that not everyone is interested in the level of detail that we go into. So starting from that series, the 2023 African Cup series, we're editing our media casts into shorter versions. Generally, for groups and teams, this will just be a summary and discussion segments of the longer podcasts. And for the player ones, just the sections on the squad's overall strength and a list of the main players that we expect to reach the competition. So that's usually 2 or 3 groups per episode.
Yes, otherwise each long version of the series contains a deep dive into the matter at hand. So if it's African Cup qualification, for example, it's a deep dive into the team's history of African Cup qualification. Or if it's the World Cup qualification, a deep dive into each team's history in qualifying for the World Cup.
Right, and all of those podcasts can be found in our library at soccerphiles.captivate.fm. That's Soccerphiles with a PH in the middle and an S at the end. And we also provide a link to our website and other relevant material in the show notes for each media cast. And in general, to find us, you can type Soccer Files Canada into Google, and it's easy to find your way from there. or just check out the show notes for this or any of our media casts, and it'll be easy to navigate from there.
Okay, see you in our future media casts.